secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply they're buried. And when they do, they can shatter lives in an instant. Imagine building a future with someone sharing a home, dreams, and the promise of a child, only to discover that the life you thought you were living was a lie. This is the chilling story of Daniel and Olivia Carter, a couple whose picture-perfect marriage masked a devastating betrayal. By all accounts, they had it all: a beautiful home in suburban Texas, successful careers, and a baby on the way. Friends and family saw them as the ideal couple, deeply in love and eagerly awaiting the arrival of their first child. But behind closed doors, cracks were forming, cracks that would soon explode into a nightmare no one saw coming. Daniel was a hard-working man, quiet but deeply devoted to his wife. He had always wanted to be a father, and when Olivia announced her pregnancy, he was overjoyed. He doted on her, attending every doctor's appointment, planning the nursery, and dreaming about the day he would hold his son in his arms. But what he didn't know was that Olivia was carrying a secret one that threatened to destroy everything. As the months passed, something about her behavior began to change. She was distant, avoiding conversations about the baby, flinching at his touch. Daniel tried to brush off his growing unease, convincing himself it was just hormones or stress. After all, pregnancy was supposed to be an emotional roller coaster, right? But then, a single discovery sent his world crashing down. One evening, while Olivia was in the shower, Daniel noticed her phone buzzing repeatedly on the nightstand. A name he didn't recognize flashed across the screen. His heart pounded as he picked it up. He knew he shouldn't invade her privacy, but a gut feeling told him something was off. What he found was worse than he could have ever imagined. Messages. Dozens of them. A conversation spanning months filled with confessions, regrets, and worst of all, confirmation that the baby Olivia was carrying wasn't his. In that moment, Daniel felt something inside him snap. His hands trembled as he read the words over and over again, his mind refusing to accept the truth. His wife, the woman he loved more than anything, had betrayed him in the cruelest way possible. And now, the child he had been preparing to welcome into the world was nothing more than a painful reminder of that betrayal. What happened next is something that would leave an entire community in shock. A marriage that seemed perfect on the outside was about to take a dark and irreversible turn. But did Daniel act out of blind rage, or had something much deeper been simmering beneath the surface all along? As we unravel the events leading up to that fateful night, one question lingers: was this a crime of passion, or was it something more sinister? Stay with me as we dive deeper into this tragic story, because the truth is far more twisted than anyone could have imagined. Daniel sat in the dim glow of the bedroom, his mind a chaotic storm of rage, heartbreak, and disbelief. The phone lay in his trembling hands, its screen still lit with the messages that had shattered his world. He could hear the water running in the bathroom, the sound so normal, so routine, it made his stomach turn. Just minutes ago, he had been thinking about what name they should choose for the baby. Now, he couldn't even look at Olivia without seeing the betrayal carved into every word she had exchanged with the man on the other end of the messages. His grip tightened around the phone as he scrolled further, his vision blurring with fury. How long had she been lying to him? How many times had she looked into his eyes and told him she loved him while carrying someone else's child? The thought alone was unbearable. But as his anger burned hotter, another feeling crept in, one that confused him. Why did she stay? Why hadn't she left him for this other man? And more importantly, did this man even know about the baby? Over the past few months, Olivia had grown distant, but there had been no major fights, no explosive arguments, nothing that would suggest their marriage was crumbling. If anything, she had seemed nervous. At first, Daniel assumed it was just the usual anxieties of pregnancy, but looking back, there were signs, subtle ones. The way she hesitated before answering his questions, the forced smile when they talked about the future, the late-night phone calls that she always dismissed as work-related. He had believed her. Why wouldn't he? They had spent 6 years together, built a life together. But now, every moment felt like a carefully constructed lie. And yet, something didn't sit right. If Olivia was having an affair, why hadn't she left before getting pregnant? And if she had planned to keep the baby, why not tell Daniel the truth from the beginning? Unless she had never intended for him to find out. His mind raced through the possibilities. Was it possible she had been trying to cover up her mistake, hoping that Daniel would never question the baby's paternity? Or was there something else, something even more unsettling? The text didn't just suggest an affair, they hinted at something deeper. Regret. Desperation. There were messages that sounded almost like warnings, like she had been trying to cut things off. "This has to stop," one of her texts read. "I can't keep doing this. He doesn't deserve this." Who was she talking about? Daniel? The baby? The man she had been seeing? And then there were the unanswered messages from the other man texts Olivia had ignored for weeks. "You can't just shut me out like this," one said. "I have a right to know." Had she been trying to hide the pregnancy from him too? A cold chill ran down Daniel's spine as a new thought took hold. What if this wasn't just a betrayal? What if Olivia had been afraid? He suddenly remembered the way she had started locking the doors at night, double-checking the windows, jumping at unexpected knocks. Had it been guilt, or had she been worried that someone was watching her? If the father of her baby was dangerous, what did that mean for Olivia? And for Daniel himself? He glanced toward the bathroom door, where the sound of running water had stopped. His heart pounded in his chest. He had started this night thinking he was the victim of a cruel deception. But what if there was more to this story than he had assumed? What if Olivia's secret wasn't just a betrayal but a warning? Something was very, very wrong. And whatever the truth was, Daniel was about to find out. Daniel's thoughts were spiraling so fast that he barely heard the bathroom door creak open. Olivia stepped into the bedroom, wrapped in a towel, her damp hair clinging to her shoulders. She looked at him, her expression soft, unaware of the storm raging inside him. He wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but something held him back. If she had been trying to hide this from him, there had to be a reason. And if there was something more sinister at play, something that made her afraid, he needed to tread carefully. He forced himself to stay calm, slipping the phone back onto the nightstand as if nothing had happened. But the next morning, when Olivia left for work, Daniel knew he couldn't just sit with his suspicions. He needed answers. He scoured her phone again, looking for any detail he might have missed. The texts from the unknown man were still there, but when he tried to trace the number, he hit a dead end. A burner phone. No social media profiles, no saved contact name, nothing that gave him even a hint of who this person was. Frustrated, he turned to Olivia's recent calls, hoping for a lead. But just as he was about to dig deeper, the phone screen flashed and then black. The entire device reset itself. Every message, every call log wiped clean. His breath caught in his throat. Had Olivia somehow known he was looking? Or worse, had someone else? That night, Daniel watched her closely, searching for any sign that she had erased the phone herself. But Olivia acted normal, maybe a little tense, but nothing that suggested she knew what he had found. If she was hiding something, she was doing an incredible job of keeping it buried. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't the only one watching. The next day, as he left the house, he noticed something strange, a black sedan parked just down the street, engine running but no one getting out. He didn't recognize the car, but when he turned to get a better look, it slowly pulled away, disappearing around the corner. His stomach twisted. He told himself it was nothing, a coincidence. But deep down, he knew better. Determined to find out more, he decided to take a different approach. If Olivia had been trying to hide this man's identity, maybe someone else knew the truth. He drove to the one person who might have answers: Olivia's best friend, Claire. She had been Olivia's closest confidant for years, the one person who knew everything. When he showed up at her doorstep unannounced, she looked startled, almost nervous. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" she asked, glancing behind her as if expecting someone to be watching. That single gesture sent a chill through him. He hadn't even said a word, and she already looked like she knew why he was there. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. Claire hesitated before finally stepping aside, letting him in. The air inside smelled of freshly brewed coffee, but beneath it, something else, something bitter, like tension hanging thick in the air. She sat across from him, fidgeting with the ring on her finger. "This is about Olivia, isn't it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel leaned forward. "I know about the baby," he said, "and I know it's not mine." Claire's face paled. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, as if struggling with something. And then, after a long silence, she whispered, "Daniel, you don't understand. This isn't just about Olivia." A cold weight settled in his chest. "What do you mean?" he pressed, but Claire shook her head quickly, glancing toward the window. I shouldn't even be talking to you." Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, hesitating before setting it back down. "Please, Daniel, just drop this. Walk away before it's too late." The urgency in her voice sent a spike of fear through him. She wasn't just worried, she was terrified. But of what? Or of who? Before he could ask anything else, Claire's phone buzzed loudly on the table. She snatched it up, eyes widening at the screen. Without a word, she stood up and rushed to the door, unlocking it and looking out as if expecting someone to be there. "You need to leave," she said, her voice sharper now. "Right now." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "Claire, what the hell is going on?" But she shook her head again, this time more forcefully. "Go, Daniel. Please. Before they know you're here." A sharp knock sounded at the door, cutting through the silence like a knife. Claire's breath hitched. She turned to him, her eyes pleading. "Don't say a word. Just go out the back." But Daniel was frozen, heart hammering, as he realized whoever was on the other side of that door wasn't just here for Claire. They were here for him. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears as he stared at the door, every instinct screaming at him to stay and demand answers. But the look in Claire's eyes, wide with panic, pleading, made his decision for him. He turned without another word, moving quickly through the small kitchen and out the back door, his breath ragged as he stepped into the cold night air. He kept low, heart racing as he made his way through the narrow alley behind Claire's house, his mind spinning with questions that had no answers. Who was at the door? Why was Claire so afraid? And more importantly, what did she mean when she said this wasn't just about Olivia? As he slipped into his car and drove away, he checked his rearview mirror obsessively, half expecting the black sedan from earlier to reappear. But the streets remained empty, eerily quiet. He gripped the wheel, his knuckles turning white. Whatever this was, it was bigger than just an affair. Olivia had been hiding something, and now Claire was too. The more he dug, the more it felt like he wasn't uncovering a simple betrayal, he was pulling at a thread that was connected to something much darker. Back at home, the house felt different, colder, heavier. Olivia was already asleep, curled up on her side, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her, feeling an unsettling mix of anger and unease. He wanted to wake her up, to force her to tell him the truth, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the exhaustion settling into his bones, or maybe it was the fact that, for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to hear what she had to say. Instead, he quietly slipped into the office, shutting the door behind him. He needed to think. He pulled out his laptop, desperate for any trace of the man Olivia had been messaging. But just like before, there was nothing. It was as if this person didn't exist. He was about to give up when his phone buzzed on the desk. He grabbed it, expecting another unknown number, another cryptic warning. But it wasn't. It was his sister, Emily. Daniel frowned. It was too late for a casual call. He hesitated before answering. He said cautiously. There was a pause, then a shaky breath on the other end. Daniel. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Something weird just happened. His stomach tightened. What do you mean? Emily exhaled sharply, like she was trying to steady herself. I got a message. From a number I don't recognize. It just said he doesn't know the full story. Tell him to stop before he gets himself killed. A wave of cold fear crashed over him. You're sure it wasn't a prank? Of course, I'm sure. Emily snapped, her voice trembling. Who would send me something like that? And why would they even mention you? Daniel ran a hand down his face, trying to keep his thoughts from spiraling. Someone wasn't just watching him, they were watching the people close to him. His sister had nothing to do with this, yet she was being dragged into it. Why? Was this a warning? Or was it a threat? And if someone knew he was digging, that meant they were paying attention. More than that, they were afraid of what he might find. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. Listen to me, Em. Don't reply to the message. Don't talk to anyone about this. I'll handle it. There was another long pause before she spoke again. Daniel. What the hell is going on? He swallowed hard. I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out. After hanging up, he sat in the silence, his mind racing. Someone was trying to scare him, to keep him from pushing any further. But what if the real danger wasn't in what he didn't know, but in what he was about to uncover? Then, just as he reached for his laptop again, a soft sound broke the silence, a shuffle just outside the office door. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. Someone was awake. And they were listening. Daniel held his breath, his pulse hammering in his ears, as he stared at the thin sliver of light under the office door. A shadow moved slowly, deliberately. Someone was standing just outside. His mind raced, every muscle in his body tensing. Olivia was supposed to be asleep. But was it her? Or was it someone else? The thought made his skin crawl. He reached for the nearest object, a heavy paperweight on his desk, gripping it tightly as he rose to his feet. The air in the room felt suffocating, thick with something unspoken, something unseen. Then silence. No footsteps, no movement, just an unbearable stillness pressing against him like an unseen force. He took a slow, careful step toward the door, his heart pounding so hard he swore it echoed in the room. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow was gone. The hallway outside was empty. No sounds, no creaking floorboards. But Daniel knew what he had seen. Someone had been there. Someone had been listening. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper, before pushing the door open and stepping into the darkened hallway. The house felt wrong, like the air itself had shifted. He moved toward the bedroom, his nerves on edge, bracing himself for something, anything. But when he reached the doorway, Olivia was still in bed, her breathing slow and steady. Asleep. Or at least, pretending to be. His skin prickled with unease. Had she heard the same sounds? Was she awake, waiting for him to say something? Or had she been the one outside his door? He barely slept that night, his mind twisting with paranoia. And the next morning, things only got worse. When he stepped outside to leave for work, he saw it. A small, unmarked envelope sitting on the windshield of his car. There was no postage, no address. Just his name, written in sharp, precise letters. His gut clenched as he glanced up and down the quiet suburban street, scanning for anyone who might be watching. But the neighborhood was still. Almost too still. He hesitated before picking it up, his fingers twitching slightly as he slid it open. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy black and white image of him. sitting in his office. From last night. His breath caught in his throat. The angle was high, like it had been taken through a vent or from some hidden camera within the house. His own house. His sanctuary. His stomach twisted violently. Someone had been inside. Someone had been watching him. A sickening realization settled over him. The shadow outside his office door. The way Olivia had grown distant. Claire's panic. Emily's warning. None of this was random. It wasn't just about the baby, or an affair, or even Olivia's secrets. This was something bigger, something carefully orchestrated. Someone wanted to control what he knew, what he found out. And now, they were letting him know he was never alone. He shoved the photo back into the envelope and climbed into his car, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. He couldn't go to the police, not yet. He didn't even know what he was dealing with. But one thing was clear: he was being watched. And if he didn't figure out the truth soon, he had no doubt in his mind. He wouldn't be alive long enough to ask any more questions. Daniel's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, his mind reeling from the photograph burning a hole in his pocket. He had been watched, inside his own home. Someone had been close enough to take a picture of him, to slip an envelope onto his car without being seen. This wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a statement. A declaration that they controlled the situation, not him. His gut twisted as he thought of Olivia, still asleep inside, completely unaware that their lives were unraveling. Or was she? His first instinct was to drive to Claire's, demand the truth from her, force her to explain why she had practically thrown him out the night before. But something held him back. The way she had looked at him, the fear in her voice, it wasn't the fear of someone hiding a secret. It was the fear of someone being watched, controlled, silenced. Claire wasn't his enemy. If anything, she might be the only person who wanted him to stop before it was too late. But stop what? What was he even looking for anymore? The truth about the baby? About Olivia? About himself? His thoughts were interrupted by his phone vibrating violently in his pocket. He snatched it up, half expecting another cryptic warning. But it wasn't an unknown number. It was Olivia. He hesitated for a second before answering. "Hey," he said, trying to steady his voice. "Daniel." Her voice was eerily calm, but something in her tone sent ice through his veins. "Where are you?" "I just stepped out for a bit," he said carefully, gripping the steering wheel. "Everything okay?" A long pause. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it, she said, "Don't come home." Daniel sat up straight, his heart slamming against his ribs. "What?" "Just listen to me," she whispered, her voice barely above her breath. "Don't come back here. Not yet." His pulse pounded in his ears. "Olivia, what's going on?" Another pause. Then, with a trembling breath, she whispered, "I found something." His grip tightened. "What do you mean?" "I was looking for my necklace," she said, her voice uneven. "I thought maybe it fell behind your desk." But, Daniel, there's something inside the vent." Daniel's breath caught. The vent. The same place where, based on the angle, the photograph of him must have been taken. His blood ran cold. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a rustling on the other end, the sound of Olivia moving, and then she exhaled sharply, like she had just seen something she couldn't believe. "There's a phone," she murmured. "And pictures. Of us? Us. Of you." She sucked in a sharp breath. "Oh my God, Daniel." "There's a picture of me sleeping." His vision blurred with rage. Someone had been inside their home, watching them for God knows how long. This wasn't just about an affair or a secret pregnancy anymore. This was something much bigger. And then Olivia's voice came again, this time barely a whisper. "Daniel, I think we've been looking at this all wrong." His grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean?" There was another rustling sound, then silence. And then Olivia gasped. A sharp, terrified breath, followed by the sound of something clattering to the floor. "Olivia?" Daniel's voice rose in panic. "What happened?" "Olivia?" The line went dead. His entire body went cold. Without thinking, he slammed his foot on the gas, his heart hammering so violently it felt like it might burst from his chest. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. He didn't care what Olivia had told him. He was going home, but as he sped toward the house, a horrifying thought crept into his mind, one he couldn't shake. If someone had been watching them for months, if they had been inside the house, if they had left a hidden phone with pictures of them, what if this was never about Olivia's secret? What if this had never been about her at all? What if Daniel wasn't the one uncovering the truth? What if he was the one being exposed? Daniel's fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His foot pressed harder on the gas, the speedometer climbing as his mind raced even faster. Olivia's sudden silence echoed in his ears, louder than the rush of wind outside the car. She had found something that had terrified her enough to ignore whatever secret she had been keeping. And now, she was gone. The line had gone dead. No second call, no text. Just that breathless gasp before the world had swallowed her whole. His gut twisted violently. Had someone taken her? Was she even still alive? The thought made his chest tighten like a vice, but he forced himself to push past the panic. He couldn't afford to fall apart now. The streets blurred past him, but the second he turned onto his block, something in the pit of his stomach screamed at him to stop. He slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, his breath shallow as he took in the scene ahead. His house was dark, too dark. The front door, which he had locked before leaving, was ajar, the faintest crack of space visible between the frame. The entire street was eerily still, the kind of silence that didn't feel natural. His body was rigid with the certainty that he was walking into something far worse than he had prepared for. He killed the engine, but didn't move right away. His instincts screamed at him to call the police, but what would he even say? That his wife had been keeping secrets, that someone had been watching them, that now she had disappeared into thin air? He had no proof, just a gnawing certainty that whatever was happening was bigger than him. Bigger than both of them. And somewhere, lurking in the shadows, was someone who wanted him to know he had already lost control. Finally, he forced himself to move. His hands were unsteady as he pushed open the car door, his breath slow and measured. His own house felt foreign as he stepped onto the porch, his heartbeat hammering in his skull. Then impact. The world exploded in metal and glass. The impact sent Daniel's world spinning. Metal screeched against metal, glass shattered into a storm of razor-sharp fragments, and the airbag exploded into his chest, knocking the breath from his lungs. The car skidded violently, tires screaming against the pavement, before slamming into something, a wall, a barricade. He couldn't tell. His vision blurred, his ears rang, and for a moment he was weightless, floating in the wreckage of his own reality. Then everything stilled. A groan escaped his lips as he forced his eyes open, his body aching from the violent crash. Smoke curled in the air, the acrid scent of burning rubber filling his nostrils. He turned his head, wincing at the sharp sting in his neck. Claire was slumped over the wheel, motionless. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, her breathing shallow but steady. They weren't dead. Not yet. But the people who hit them weren't finished. Through the shattered windshield, Daniel saw the headlights of the pursuing car flicker before shutting off. Then silence. No sirens, no frantic voices, just the slow creak of a car door opening. A figure stepped out, shadowed by the dim glow of the streetlights, moving toward them with purpose. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. Instinct kicked in. He fumbled with his seatbelt, his hands slick with sweat, his mind screaming at him to move. Claire stirred beside him, her eyelids fluttering open. "Daniel," she croaked, dazed, but there was no time to check on her. The figure was closer now, each footstep deliberate, unhurried. They weren't rushing. They knew he had nowhere to go. Daniel's fingers brushed against something hard near the dashboard, his only hope. The flash drive. He grabbed it, shoving it deep into his pocket just as the driver's side door was wrenched open. A firm hand yanked him out of the wreckage, shoving him onto the cold pavement. He hit the ground hard, his palms scraping against the rough asphalt, but he barely felt it. His vision cleared just in time to see a pair of polished black boots stepping toward him. Slowly he lifted his gaze, his heart hammering as he took in the figure standing over him. It wasn't a stranger. It was Olivia. She stood there composed, unshaken, a stark contrast to the last time he'd seen her pleading, terrified, warning him not to come home. But now there was no fear in her eyes. Only something colder. Something calculated. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. No. She tilted her head, watching him, and then, with the faintest smirk, she whispered, "You should have stopped digging." A wave of nausea rolled through him. Every instinct he had fought, every doubt, every red flag, it had all been leading to this. Olivia hadn't been the victim. She had been the architect. "You set me up," he breathed, realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. All of it, the affair, the messages, the photos, it was all just to keep me looking the wrong way. Olivia crouched beside him, her expression unreadable. "It wasn't personal," she murmured, as if that made it better. "They couldn't risk you remembering. You weren't supposed to question things, Daniel. You were supposed to live your life, oblivious. But you got too close." His stomach twisted. "To what?" She sighed, almost disappointed. "To yourself." Before he could react, pain exploded across his skull as something struck him from behind. The world tilted, colors bleeding into one another, and the last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him was Olivia's face, watching him fall. When Daniel woke, he was strapped to a chair. His head throbbed, his vision hazy, but the sterile scent of disinfectant and cold steel told him everything he needed to know. He was in a lab. Or a facility. Somewhere he was never meant to see. A soft hum of machinery buzzed in the background, accompanied by the faint flicker of a monitor displaying lines of code. Biometric scans, his biometric scans. His wrists were bound, but as he strained against them, a familiar voice drifted from the shadows. "You were never supposed to wake up." Daniel's blood turned to ice as a figure emerged from the dim light. Not Olivia this time. Someone worse. Dr. Evan Carter. A man Daniel barely remembered. A man who, until now, had only been a ghost lurking in the fragments of his forgotten past. But seeing him now, it all came rushing back. The experiments. The endless tests. The conditioning. "You did well, Daniel," Carter said, his voice smooth, clinical. "Most don't make it this far. But you always were exceptional." Daniel's jaw clenched. "What the hell did you do to me?" Carter tilted his head. "We made you perfect. Stronger. Smarter. More adaptable. A controlled variable in an unpredictable world." He gestured toward the screen flashing behind him. "You were one of the best, but then you malfunctioned." Daniel's stomach twisted. "I'm not a machine." Carter's smirk was almost pitying. "Aren't you?" Daniel's breathing quickened, his pulse hammering as the memories bled through the cracks. The training, the missions, the programming. He had been engineered, sculpted into something beyond human. But when he had started asking the wrong questions, when he had begun remembering they had planted Olivia in his life to keep him complacent, to keep him blind. "You were supposed to be erased," Carter continued, circling him like a predator. "But Olivia convinced us to give you a chance, to let you believe in your little life, your little marriage. And it worked." He leaned in, until it didn't. Daniel's teeth clenched. "She played me. She saved you. Carter sighed, almost disappointed. And this is how you repay her? Daniel's mind raced. His muscles tensed against the restraints. They thought they had won, that they had him under control. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for. They had designed him to be perfect, but perfection was unpredictable. He inhaled sharply, slowing his heart rate, focusing his strength. Then, in one swift, violent motion, he yanked against the restraints with everything he had. The chair buckled, the metal snapping under pressure, and before Carter could react, Daniel lunged forward. The room erupted into chaos. Carter stumbled back, yelling for security, but Daniel didn't wait. His body moved on instinct, a force of nature honed by years of conditioning. He tore through the lab, smashing equipment, grabbing the flash drive from a nearby table. Alarms blared, red lights flashing, but he didn't stop. There was no turning back now. He had one chance to expose the truth, to make sure they never controlled him or anyone else again. And if Olivia was in his way, then she had made her choice. The rain poured in heavy sheets as Daniel stood at the edge of the city, staring down at the glowing flash drive in his palm. The past few days had unraveled his entire existence, leaving him with nothing but fractured memories and a bitter truth: he had never been who he thought he was. His life, his choices, even his love for Olivia, it had all been engineered. A carefully crafted illusion designed to keep him docile, compliant, blind. And now, standing here in the aftermath of it all, he had to decide what came next. The facility was gone, reduced to rubble, burning in the distance, like the remnants of a forgotten nightmare. Carter was dead, his screams swallowed by the flames. His last words, a twisted plea for Daniel to remember what he truly was. But Daniel had chosen not to listen. He wasn't a machine. He wasn't a project. He was human, no matter what they had done to him. And he had fought for that humanity with everything he had. But Olivia, she had been the final wound he wasn't sure would ever heal. He had given her one last chance. One moment to step away from the people who had created this hell. But she had made her choice. With a gun aimed at his chest, and eyes full of something too complicated to name, she had whispered, "I loved you once." And then she pulled the trigger. She hadn't expected him to survive. Daniel pressed a hand to his ribs, where the bullet had grazed him, a shallow wound compared to everything else he had endured. He had walked away from that burning building, leaving Olivia to whatever fate awaited her. Maybe she had escaped. Maybe she was still out there, waiting for the next opportunity to bring him back under control. But Daniel knew one thing: he would never let that happen. The flash drive felt heavier in his grip. Inside, it was the truth. Proof of what they had done to him, what they had done to others like him, men and women designed to be perfect, wiped clean and placed into carefully constructed lives. Some had never woken up. Some had never questioned the gaps in their memories, the strange coincidences, the feeling of something just beyond their reach. But Daniel had. And now, he had a choice. He could expose everything. Send the files to every news outlet, every government agency that wasn't already under their control. He could tear down the entire system, bring their secrets into the light, make sure no one else suffered the way he had. But then what? Would it change anything? Or would new hands pick up where Carter had left off, rebuilding in the shadows, making sure the truth was buried deeper than before? Or he could disappear. Walk away. Start over. Let the past burn with the wreckage he had left behind. For the first time in his life, no one was pulling the strings. No one was telling him who to be, what to believe, what to forget. The freedom was terrifying. And yet, as he exhaled into the cold night air, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. He slipped the flash drive into his pocket and turned away from the city, walking into the darkness, into the unknown.